Explosions rip through the night sky. Air defenses light up the darkness. Missiles launch. Sirens scream. And within seconds, you realize this is not a drill. This is history unfolding in real time. Why did the United States and Israel launch direct strikes on Iran? Was this war inevitable? Or was it a calculated choice made behind closed doors? And now that Iran is retaliating against US bases and Israel itself, are we watching deterrence at work? Or the beginning of a regional firestorm that could spiral out of control? This is not just another headline, not just another Middle East flare-up. This moment has the potential to redraw power lines, collapse alliances, shock global markets, and pull the world into something far bigger than most people are prepared for. Stay with me, because in this video we're going to break down the real causes behind this war, the strategy driving each move, and the consequences nobody on mainstream media is explaining. And before we go any further, if you want clear, unfiltered geopolitical analysis instead of emotional propaganda, hit the like button to push this video further, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next, and in the comments type the word peace, tell me which country you're watching from, and what time it is right now in your part of the world. Because this conflict is global and I want to hear every perspective. Now let's slow this down and understand how we got here. Because the war between Iran and Israel didn't begin with these explosions, and US involvement didn't start overnight. This crisis has been building for decades through shadow wars, proxy battles, sanctions, assassinations, and failed diplomacy, with Iran expanding its regional influence while Israel views that expansion as an existential threat, and Washington caught between deterrence, dominance, and domestic politics. Benjamin Netanyahu, who has long warned that a nuclear-capable Iran is a red line Israel cannot allow to be crossed. And Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, whose death in this conflict marked a seismic shock to Iran's power structure and psychological posture. This is not a minor skirmish or a limited strike. It is a deliberate escalation driven by nuclear fears, regional dominance, domestic political survival, and the belief that striking first is safer than waiting. The bold truth is this: when diplomacy collapses and red lines blur, wars don't start by accident. They start because leaders decide the risk of action is lower than the risk of restraint. And that decision may now be pulling the entire Middle East, and possibly the world, into a new and far more dangerous chapter. What you're witnessing didn't begin with a single missile launch or a single decision inside the White House or the Israeli War Cabinet. The historical build-up to this war was slow, layered, and filled with warnings that most people ignored because they were buried under daily headlines. The collapse of nuclear negotiations was the first domino. For years, diplomacy between Washington and Tehran moved in cycles of hope and breakdown. Deadlines were extended. Inspectors debated access. Sanctions were tightened, then partially eased. But beneath the diplomatic language, mistrust hardened. The United States accused Iran of edging closer to weapons-grade enrichment, insisting the program was no longer purely civilian. Tehran denied it, framing its nuclear work as sovereign and peaceful. Yet enrichment levels rose, oversight shrank, and ambiguity grew. That ambiguity is what makes nations nervous, and nervous nations make aggressive decisions. Then came the 2025 missile strikes. In 2025, Iran launched direct missile attacks against Israel after a series of shadow confrontations escalated into open exchange. For Israel, that moment shattered an old assumption, that Iran preferred to fight through proxies alone. Now the missiles were direct, the message unmistakable. Israeli leadership saw a future where precision-guided missiles and potentially nuclear capability could converge. That fear changed the equation. Meanwhile, the United States quietly began increasing its military footprint in the region. Carrier strike groups rotated closer to the Gulf. Air defense systems were reinforced. Strategic bombers conducted visible patrols. Officially, it was deterrence. Unofficially, it was preparation. If you play the clips side by side, speeches by Donald Trump promising strength and no nuclear Iran, and Benjamin Netanyahu warning the world that time was running out, you see the narrative forming months before the first strike. Words turned sharper. Red lines became explicit. The psychological groundwork for war was being laid in public. So why did they take this step? First, nuclear red lines and failed diplomacy. From Washington's perspective, the talks had become a delaying tactic. Intelligence briefings reportedly suggested Iran was shortening its breakout time, the time required to produce enough fissile material for a bomb. Israel has long considered a nuclear-armed Iran an existential threat, not a strategic inconvenience. For Israeli planners, this is not abstract geopolitics. It is survival doctrine shaped by history. If they believed Iran was approaching weaponization capability, waiting would be gambling with national survival. That's the contrast. Critics say diplomacy needed more time. Supporters argue time was exactly what Iran was using to cross the threshold. Second, regional deterrence and power projection. The strikes were framed not only as targeting nuclear infrastructure, but degrading missile stockpiles, drone factories, and proxy networks. The argument was simple. Weaken the infrastructure now to prevent a larger war later. The U.S. labeled it preemptive self-defense, a controversial but powerful doctrine. It's a bold claim that attacking first can actually prevent bloodshed in the long run. Supporters call it realism. Critics call it escalation, disguised as caution. Third, internal politics and pressure. Regional allies, particularly those deeply concerned about Iranian expansion, reportedly pushed Washington toward a harder line. At home, strong security messaging plays differently than cautious diplomacy. For leaders facing political polarization, projecting strength can consolidate support. The tension here is uncomfortable but real. Strategic decisions often intersect with political survival. Fourth, regime change messaging. During the conflict, Trump called on the Iranian people to take back their country, rhetoric that shifted from deterrence to transformation. Netanyahu echoed similar sentiments, framing the conflict as against the regime, not the people. That language changes the emotional temperature of war. It suggests not just military objectives, but political reshaping. Then came February 28, 2026. Operation Epic Fury, also referred to as Lion's Roar Singiswald, began before dawn. Coordinated U.S. and Israeli forces launched precision strikes against facilities in Tehran, Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordo. Imagine the map lighting up, simultaneous impacts, air defenses scrambling, command structures disrupted. The operation reportedly targeted nuclear infrastructure and senior leadership nodes, including locations associated with Ali Khamenei. The speed was overwhelming. Cyber disruptions preceded kinetic strikes. Air superiority was established within hours. It was designed to shock, to paralyze, to demonstrate dominance. Supporters called it decisive. Opponents called it the spark. Iran's retaliation followed swiftly. Ballistic missiles arced across the sky toward Israeli cities and U.S. bases in the Gulf. Drone swarms attempted to saturate air defenses. Sirens echoed in Tel Aviv. Military installations in the region activated interceptors. Oil markets reacted instantly, prices spiking on fears of shipping disruption through the Strait of Hormuz. Civilians felt the consequences first: fear, displacement, uncertainty. Iranian officials vowed that retaliation would not be symbolic, but sustained. The rhetoric hardened. The region braced. And now we reach the consequences. An emergency session at the United Nations saw global powers condemning escalation and urging restraint. Russia and China called for de-escalation, while Western allies navigated diplomatic tightropes. The risk is no longer isolated conflict. It is regional chain reaction. Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, tensions in the Gulf. In Washington, debates over war powers resurfaced, raising constitutional and political questions. Long-term, the implications are profound. Nuclear proliferation pressures could increase if states conclude that only a nuclear deterrent prevents attack. Alliances may solidify or fracture depending on outcomes. Power balances are shifting in real time. Here's the bold truth. Wars like this don't erupt from chaos alone. They emerge when leaders decide uncertainty is more dangerous than confrontation. Whether that calculation proves stabilizing or catastrophic is the question that now hangs over the Middle East and over the world. So, as we come to the end of this breakdown, strip away the slogans, the press conferences, and the emotional headlines, and what's left is a far more uncomfortable truth. Nuclear fears, political strategy, and regional deterrence, not simple retaliation, brought the world to this moment. This war wasn't sparked by a single missile or sudden outrage. It was shaped by years of mistrust, by red lines that kept moving, by leaders who believed waiting was more dangerous than striking first. Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu didn't just react, they calculated. And Iran didn't just respond. It signaled that deterrence cuts both ways. The tension you feel watching this unfold isn't accidental. It's the weight of a world realizing that once escalation becomes normalized, de-escalation becomes harder with every passing hour. Now, the real questions fall on all of us watching this in real time. Did Trump and Netanyahu truly have no choice, or were there off-ramps that history will later say were ignored? Was this the last possible move to prevent something worse, or the first step towards something far bigger and far more destructive? And most importantly, what comes next for the Middle East? Containment, collapse, or a new and dangerous balance of power? These aren't academic questions. The answers will shape energy markets, global security, alliances, and the lives of millions of people who had no say in these decisions. If this analysis gave you clarity instead of chaos, make sure you support the channel by hitting the like button. It tells the algorithm that serious conversations still matter. Subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown, because this story is far from over and the next move could come faster than anyone expects. And I want to hear from you directly. Drop your prediction in the comments, type peace, tell me which country you're watching from, and what time it is right now where you are. Because this conflict isn't local, it's global, and your voice is part of this moment in history.